Welcome back to Weekend Breakfast. The time 8:44 on Sunday, March the 12th. I'm joined by the wife, Dr. Renee Hunderkamp, 2 doctors for the price of 1. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's time now for the Future Politics Panel.
The Future Politics Panel.
Well, better late than never. Joining us this morning, Jonathan Gibson, who's a political commentator, and Jess Gill, who's host of Reasoned UK. Very good morning to you both.
Good morning, David.
Good morning. So you had a disaster with your cab, didn't you?
I just didn't show up.
Didn't show up. You were running around.
Exactly.
Like
I was crazy, then got out the wrong exit of the station. Didn't seem to be going my way this morning, unfortunately.
Oh, well, don't worry, because my driver had the wrong energy. Couldn't drive, wrong energy.
In the wrong job.
In the wrong job. Anyway, really good to see both of you. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. Should we start about the junior doctor strike this morning, which obviously is about to start? So this is 3 days' worth. Obviously, 2 of us are doctors in this room and were junior doctors. This 72-hour action starts at 7 o'clock on Monday. This is the longest industrial action yet by any health union. The extraordinary thing for me is they are also withdrawing from A&E departments as well as planned care, and we believe that something like 500,000 procedures could be affected, with up to 100,000 axed every single day for the days of the walkout. So where do you start, Jess? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm going to take a controversial opinion here, but I'm actually pro-doctor. I'm pro-striker, but I'm also pro-patient. I think it's important that we prioritise patients, and I don't like this this battle between doctors, the staff, the NHS staff who work so hard, and the patients who really need the support, especially considering the waiting lists and the failures of the NHS. And this is the product of when you have a nationalised healthcare system. I think if we just privatised it, have more competition, I think we wouldn't have this issue.
Wow, I wasn't expecting you to say that. So hang on, so what is really interesting about what you said is I've heard a lot of junior doctors saying that they are striking to make the health service better. No, they're not. They're striking for more money.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's nothing wrong with wanting more money. We shouldn't discourage people from being ambitious. After working so much for being a doctor, you deserve a better pay, I think, and no one should discourage you from doing so. But when it becomes at the expense of a patient, which is what happens with strikes, that becomes an issue. I think it's important that the people of this country have proper healthcare treatment. I think that's right. And the reason why they don't is because of the NHS. There's a reason why all these strikes are in the public sector.
Yeah, so, Jonathan, I imagine you have a contrary opinion, but there is something really valid there, which is we know the NHS is a huge, monstrous beast. We know it needs massive reform, and it's not being reformed. We're throwing more and more money at it, and when doctors go out on strike, and particularly the militant tactics they're planning to use, the patients suffer.
No, absolutely, and the consequences, the ramifications are going to be really, really upsetting. They're going to be huge. It's almost unprecedented having sort of A&E services striking, and I'm really concerning, and I actually agree with Jess in the fact that I think doctors do deserve more pay. I think they deserve better welfare considering the hours they work, the length they've trained. I disagree with the solution in order to get that point. Certainly, I do not think privatisation is the way to go. I think if you look at countries in which it's more privatised, like the US or places around there, which becomes a profitable issue, it's clearly a public good healthcare.
So what would you do as young people? Is there a sort of halfway house where you have a myriad of services? So you say the NHS will provide core services. This is what we do. If you want bolt-ons, then you go privately.
I mean, there's so many other options other than the NHS. It's not just this dichotomy between the US and the UK system. The US system has a lot of problems, but we can look at Germany, we can look at Singapore, for example, Australia. Most other countries aren't copying the NHS, which is surprising considering it's the envy of the world.
Yeah, it's a great point. Why aren't people copying us?
No, I certainly don't think it is the envy of the world. I think there's plenty of things that are wrong with it, and I think you two as, doctors will be able to have had first-hand experience where I definitely haven't, but, there is wastage of money, and there does need to be reform. Fundamentally, I do like the idea in which there's support for merit good, which, can keep people in the workplace. That means people aren't suffering and can get access to healthcare, which is, affordable. But having said that, clearly I do think there needs to be reform. There needs to be talk about wastage in terms of consultancy. There needs to be talk about wastage in terms of, training training and ineffective packages and more focus on, the actual creating a massive package than getting hands-on experiences, the difficult going back into the workplace for doctors that, have stopped working in the workplace, and why are so many people going to Australia? Why are so many people going private? We need to reevaluate those sorts of things to make it more appealing.
What do you make of the union tactics? Renee and I were really shocked this morning. The fact is, the BMA, they are essentially saying to doctors who may well want to strike, don't tell your Truss, because we don't want them to know, so therefore they can't have contingency planning. And equally, they've asked all of them to keep tabs on every single doctor to work out how pro-strike they are. That seems very underhand and rather like a bit of skullduggery to me.
I mean, it's a tough one. Obviously, I don't endorse people, pretty much investigating behind people's political beliefs. I think as a doctor, your prime role should be a doctor. But again, I think it's an issue of a lack of competition. If you don't like how a service is how your work is run in, like Amazon, for example, you can always move to a different company. Or if you work at Asda, you can always go to Tesco. But with the NHS, where do you go?
Jonathan?
You go to the private sector.
Yeah, but we want to retain people in the NHS because, it's good for the country at the end of the day. So we don't want people moving to the other sector. We need to find sort of a form of retention. So I'm just not sure that, it's a solution to simply say you can pack up your bags and go, because at the end of the day they need to earn an income.
So as young people, what do you think the solution is? Clearly we need to reform it. How would you reform it? Would you take the best of those models, as Renee says, from Australia, for example? Would you have some sort of social care provision underpinning all of this?
So at the end of the day, look, the doctors are striking because they're not earning enough money. And I think it is fair to say they're not earning enough money. If you look at the comparisons in terms of wages with lots of other countries around the world, they are earning significantly less, junior doctors.
I'm not sure that's entirely true. I mean, certainly in the lower grades they are, but when you actually... I've got the list of exactly what they are paid. But just in terms of the issue, actually, because it's very muddied by we don't have enough doctors, and that's the reason for that is we're not training enough doctors and we're not retaining enough doctors.
But it's expensive to train doctors, again, at the end of the day.
It's expensive to lose them.
It's incredibly expensive to lose them, expensive to train them. I think bringing in more doctors from abroad, I know that's controversial, but I think that was one way of doing it. Yeah, and I think
more doctors in the UK were registered last year with the GMC from abroad than from the UK.
Yeah, and I think that's that's propping up the weaknesses of the system that there is now. I think it's important, and without that it would entirely crumble almost.
I mean, we've had loads of messages this morning saying for the first time in my life I've actually got private healthcare. Do you think this is going to be a trend that we're going to see more and more of?
I think the NHS has a lot of issues, and I think this is the only way people can get out of it. The NHS is failing so many people, and middle-class people in particular are able to have these other options. It's a shame that this can't be extended to working-class people. I wish healthcare was affordable, because free healthcare, what's the point of free healthcare at the point of use when you can't even use it because of the long waiting lines?
No, you're absolutely right. You can't see a GP. You have to book in miles ahead. And I am pleased to see the government wants to put an end to that 8 a.m. scramble. We've spoken about that. The fact is you call at 8 o'clock and you're meant to be able to get an appointment, not in Renee's practice, because it's a very good practice.
It is a very good practice.
But that's the kind of thing that we need to be thinking about. Can we just also talk about and move on to another story now? This is about Jeremy Hunt. Obviously, we've got the spring statement that is coming up. There's going to be a major battle brewing, not only on corporation tax and possibly the rise to 25% from 19%, but basically Jeremy Hunt this morning has been accused of undermining Brexit by agreeing to international corporation tax rules. So obviously there is this sort of agreement with major economies to say that we never take corporation tax down to 19%. Surely the thing to do is to make small businesses grow by putting up corporation tax to 25%. That is a massive disincentive, isn't it?
We've already had lockdown, which has completely crushed businesses, and now we're putting forward all these taxes. I mean, as a young person, what's the point of living in the UK? Can't get a job, taxes are so high. The government is pretty much discouraging young people from being innovative and ambitious through taxation and inflation. It's ridiculous.
And where do you stand, Jonathan?
I disagree. I think that there's still very much an incentive to be ambitious and to get a job. I don't think I see young people around me at university be saying, I'm not going to try my best.
Well, tell me, why should we put up corporation tax to 25%?
Why should we put up corporation tax? Because corporations, at the end of the day, I'm not saying necessarily we should put up as high as that, but I'm saying we need to, for example, look at the way in which corporations do benefit off of public goods, transport, healthcare, these kinds of, services and provisions which otherwise wouldn't be paid for. At the end of the day, they are paid for by corporations, and they are paid for by the taxpayer.
Hang on a minute. What about if you've got a small small business, you employ 5 people, but you have to pay corporation tax.
Right, so we need to look again and discriminate in terms of between businesses.
But they don't.
No, so that's something that, needs to be taken into account of. And I think, with the record profits that the massive businesses and shell corporations have been making, we need to, put more pressure on that. I'm sure for small businesses, I think it's a mistake to, try and weasel out every last penny of them, because we need to incentivise growth and we need to incentivise small businesses to be able to survive and grow in a really difficult environment.
So you make a really good point. There are 2 types of businesses here. Those big multinationals that have been making a lot of money, and all of those tiny SMEs, the small and medium enterprises, who haven't been making any money, had to take massive loans, and they're going to also be saddled with a 25% rate.
Yeah, no, and I think it's difficult. You can be quite cold-hearted and say that at the end of the day, if big businesses are able to get things cheaper through mass production and big sort of chains of supply, then it's just the way the economy works. But at the same time, it's hard to see businesses failing and individuals losing their job and their livelihoods. And
Jess, what do you think is going to happen in terms of the spring statement? I have a feeling that that Jeremy Hunt may well have a rabbit.
I'm not quite sure. This certainly isn't the party of Margaret Thatcher. I think they saw how disastrous Liz Truss's economic plan was, although I'd argue that isn't because of the tax cuts, that's because of the energy price cap. That was completely ridiculous.
So actually you quite like what Liz Truss did you?
I love the tax cuts. I think you need to find a way to not fund those tax cuts because you're basically letting people keep their money, but you need to fund the public spending. Public spending has got way out of hand, and I'm fed up of this pragmatism, quite frankly. I think we need radicalism. The radical Conservative Party that Thatcher put forward. I think if the Conservative Party want to win in the next election, that's how they do it. The British people are fed up of this pragmatic government which doesn't really stand for anything.
Oh, say that again. So how did the Conservative Party win? This is your call to the nation. What would you say to the Prime Minister then?
I think we need tax cuts. I think the country is completely fed up of this flimsy government which doesn't really stand for anything. I was quite happy with the immigration plan, for example. I think that was great. But I think the government needs to take more action, not just giving red meat to the voters. We've had how many years of Conservative government? 12 years of Conservative government. And what have they actually shown with it?
It's a good point. Jonathan?
I entirely disagree. I don't think now is the time to be rolling the dice with the UK economy, if I'm honest. I think people want stability, and I think we saw through radicalism and through these radical policies how much that scared investors, how much that scared the markets.
I think 25% increase, a 25% corporation tax is scaring people.
We're talking about the Liz Truss stuff here, which I think
the
is
Liz
much
Truss
more
thing,
extreme.
to be fair to her, actually was never allowed to see the light of day. And actually, a lot of this was playing to the markets. It actually, I think, would have actually benefited people on the ground.
But then why did the markets respond so negatively?
Because the markets are about the markets.
Yeah, the markets are about the markets, and had a great big pension hole that was about to burst, and it was a beautiful way for them to hide what was going on in pensions and blame somebody else. This was all a game. It was a massive game.
I disagree. I think at the end of the day it was because you're playing fast and loose with a government in which there's rising inflation. You're pitching the government off against the Bank of England with interest rates, and through that you can't win if you've got an independent body which is controlling an inflation. They both just keep on hiking it.
OK, let me ask you very quickly about something else. Apparently the government's going to roll out skills boot camps across the country. They want to get over 50s back into work. So apparently they're going to work with local employers. They will help older workers gain new skills through something called a midlife MOT scheme. So apparently they want the over 50s to work in construction and technology. Good or a bad idea?
I'm not really sure. I'm all for increasing people in the workforce, but I think over 50s have already had their time in the workforce. Surely they should be considering retirement eventually. And I think, what's the point of working? This goes back to the original thing, when taxes are so high, when you get so much benefits. Like, what's the point? You're probably going to earn more. I know people who are earning more on benefits than they would working. They see it as a complete waste of time.
Interesting. Jonathan, should we get the over 50s back into work? Be very careful what you say here.
I just think we need people to fill jobs, right? Clearly we've got a big lack of jobs. Clearly there are people that incentivise to work right now. There's lots of people that want to come into the country to get work. If we need to fill the jobs, why don't we allow people to, who want to work rather than spending lots of money on these training provision schemes?
Well, to keep the wages down by just bringing in loads more people.
I don't think you keep your wages down because you increase demand. No, but you also increase demand for goods and services.
If you flood the market with people, you do. We have 1 million people. We have 1 million vacancies in this country. Should we fill them with our own people?
We don't have enough people.
We have 5.9 people.
Well, we have got lots of people.
We've got record employment. We've got the highest employment in UK history.
5.9 million people economically inactive.
Right.
So 830,000, the uplift of 830,000 came from the over 50s.
Sorry, sir.
So basically, we know the numbers of their over 50. The question is, the over 50s, and going back to your point, don't really want to work. They've had enough.
They don't want to work. You know, it's going to cost the government lots of money in order to run these provisions and run these training workshops when there's much cheaper alternatives. And I think, frankly, I don't really understand why.
Much cheaper alternatives being bring
people in who want to work, you contribute to the economy.
No,
but if you have more people who are, you know, in demand for goods and services, that inevitably will increase the prices.
I think you two have to take this offline. I'm so sorry, I have to stop it there. Thank you so much for coming in. Jess Gill, host of Reason UK, and Jonathan Gibson, who was late, political commentator. This is TalkTV.